Chindake's vision recovered from the dazzling flashlight, and there were still waves of high-pressure current around him. He lay on the cold Pebbles Road, his damp breath dripped into his nose, reminding him like an uninvited guest that this was no longer a familiar laboratory. The noise around was gradually unfolding, and the rhythm of a horse's hooves knocking on the ground, accompanied by the echo of pedestrians' murmurs, roaring on the dim streets. He stood up, rubbed his palm over the rough stone block, and the buzzing bird that had just been in full swing in the sea of brain. The burning pain seemed to be wandering at his fingertips. Chindake shook his head and tried to calm his body. The surrounding scene made him breathless for a while. Old Victorian buildings stand like giants, with spotted paint layers casting long shadows under dim lights. He instinctively touched his pocket, touching a twisted metallic finger, which was originally his modern mobile phone, and at this moment only the crackling sparks were flashing between his fingers. A panic rose from his chest, and he couldn't help but gasp, his eyes wandering around, capturing the hissing of the steam engine coming from the corner of the street, amid a wave of heat. Xiaowei's shouting sounds rose from afar, promoting the fragrance of fresh bread and the smell of coal smoke on the street, which could not contain the hidden smell of horse stew. He stood calmly and stumbled forward, his brain still buzzing. On the street, the crowds rush like a tide, and each step is accompanied by the trampling of leather boots, like a messy march. Chindake hit the coal lights on the road. The lights swayed and made a crisp tingling response. His shoulders hurt, and he cursed them, but he didn't stop. He gasped and ran, his heart pounding wildly in his chest, trying to recall the moment of the electric shock. The blue-white arc plotted through the field, causing a gloomy feeling. What is going on?" he murmured, his voice being swallowed by the noise around him. "Didn't the high-pressure shock just now want me to die? Wait, there are old antiques around him. Did I really travel through time? It's so cool, but it's so scary." The narrow alley was like a secret gap, attracting him to hide. In the alley, the low sound of the church clock was far away, and he calmed his breath a little. He leaned against the cold wall and felt the rough stone texture on his back, and a piece of silk was dampened into his clothes. His heartbeat was sluggish, and he took a deep breath. His brain flashed through the fantasy of the second period. The time travel heroes in science fiction novels always relied on miracles to reverse the situation. System. Freezing a random knowledge card, send me a quick shot. He murmured softly, with a trembling in his verbal tune, please make me a super scientist, don't let me die in this ghost place. A group of virtual light flashed from their palms, and the blue light jumped like sparks in the darkness, accompanied by the buzzing beehives. The knowledge card appears slowly, and a slight scan of data sounds on the surface, like a slight wind blowing over the paper. Chindake sniffed his eyes and stared at the words on the card, his heartbeat accelerated again. Hot water freezes faster than cold water? He murmured, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but sneer, this sounds like a super second, but if I can use this to fool who I might be able to survive. Einstein? If he is here, I'll talk to him. The world outside the alley is hustle and bustle, and the street musician's harmonica sound is flying, mixing the laughter of the beer house and the collision between the glasses is crisp. He held the card tightly, and his fingers felt its imaginary texture, which brought inexplicable power. The surrounding smell, the mixture of coal smoke and moist soil, he realized that this was not a dream, but a real 1920 Germany. He decided not to hide anymore, so he walked out of the alley and walked along the street. Passers-by hurriedly walked past, wearing old-fashioned coats and hats, their steps were ringing back on the stone road, like an unfinished rhythm. Chindake secretly observed them, his eyes swept over a strange face, and a lonely heart surged. A wind blew, rolling up the old paper on the ground, and the paper rustled and fell on his foot. He picked it up, his eyes swept over the title about Einstein's news, and his heart leaped. Far away, the long whistle of the train whistle sounded like a warning, reminding him of the urgency of time. There may be a way to go back through time, he thought, his fingers holding the paper turned white, but you must survive first now. Deep in the street, a car drove over and a dusty soil was raised to cover the visual line. Chindake's eyes were filled with excitement and determination. He put his knowledge into his pocket, opened his pace, and integrated into the crowd. The lights at the entrance of the alley fade away behind them, and unknown adventures are waiting in front of them. Chindak walked along the stone road, and the paper moved slightly in his hand, stepping on the echo of replies at every step. On the street, the hissing of the steam engine sounded like a shaped wave, pushing the air around it, and a heated air wrapped around the pungent smell of coal smoke, sweeping towards his face. He held the virtual knowledge card tightly, and felt a faint buzz at his fingertips, as if the current was wandering in the telescope, and he was rumbling about Einstein in his brain, and his rush was as fast as a tide. The crowd rushed like a tide, he hid from pedestrians, and his leather boots slipped over the smooth road. A horse drove past the side, and the wheels crunched and scattered a lot of soil, blurring the visual line. Chindak said to himself in a low voice, "I have to rely on this card to flip the plate this time." The sound was swallowed by the yelling from the street and the hissing of a horse, which ignited the determination in his eyes. He turned into a quiet alley, with dim coal lights swaying at the top, and the lights blue lights, like a faint flame. Soon, he stopped in front of an old-fashioned building, and the lantern at the door cast a long shadow. The outer wall of the building was stained and crawling with the traces of the year old. He took a few deep breaths, his chest was undulating, trying to suppress the tightness in his heart. His fingers adjusted the clothes, the fabric rustled in the palm of his palm, and then he knocked hard, and the sound reverberated in the empty alley. After waiting for a while, the harmonica sound from the street musician from far away seemed to be mocking his recklessness. The door opened slowly, and a familiar and unfamiliar face appeared. Einstein stood behind the door, his eyebrows were slightly anaconda, and his eyes were confused. He blinked, with the background of the ticking sound of bells inside the house and the lightness of the paper flipping. Chindak was stunned for a moment, his chest was beating like a war drum, and he immediately smiled and stepped into the door. The wooden floor made a light and slight sound under his feet. He looked around, with physical books piled up on the table, and a ding-like response was made when the test tube collided, and the air was filled with ink and dust. "Hello, Mr. Einstein." Chindak opened his mouth, with a sense of confidence in his second-class language. He pointed to a glass of water on the table. "I am a talented young man from the future. The knowledge card in my hand told me that hot water freezes faster than cold water. Is this because of the relationship between molecular movement? Don't you think this has overturned your relative basis?" His fingers were plodding in the air, and his hands praised Zhang Xiao for his convincing power. The knowledge card shone slightly, like a hidden help. Einstein was stuttering for a moment, his eyebrows were even tighter. He slammed his head and stood up to approach. "Young man, this is absurd theory." "But, wait, the molecular movement you said seems to make sense. Can you tell me more variables? Come on, let me know." Inside the house, outside the window, the sound of the horse driving in the car entered, highlighting the ridiculous and intimidating conversation. Chindak took advantage of the opportunity to go forward and surrounded the wall. He was more agile than planned, of course. Imagine that the hot water molecules jump faster, so they cool faster. This is my super time in space physics. The flames burst into the walls, crackling an accompaniment like a rhythm. Einstein picked up a glass of water and gurgling sounds came out from the side. He looked at it, and the water splashed up, dampening the tabletop. Chindak's eyes lit up, and his language burst into confidence. "If you let me stay, I guarantee that you can take your research to the next level." With the silence, there was only the lightness of breathing and the movement of time in the house, as if time was watching statically. Einstein was slow and patted Chindak on the shoulder, and the action brought an unexpected warmth. "Well, you strange guy, make me feel fresh. Maybe you can be my unofficial question. But let me first clarify, that hidden device, it may be related to time travel, so we have to be careful of Nazi's nose." The sound of footsteps on the floor was unrestrained, and they walked towards the guest room, and Einstein's verbal tuning turned low on the way, suggesting potential crisis in the future. Chindak's eyes were flashing, and he felt a current of excitement. "I understand, we will face it." The guest room door was opened, the wooden bed suddenly blew up in the room, and the night cries came out of the window, as soft as a quiet melody. He sat on the bed, relaxing his hand holding the knowledge card, and the tightness of his fingertips gradually dissipated. The air in the room became warm, like a preliminary friend's embrace. Outside the window, a mysterious silhouette appeared, like a shadow of the future waiting. Chindake stood up from the bed, and the knowledge card was still in his palm, emitting a faint warmth, like a group of jumping flames in the night. He took a deep breath, his chest undulating, turning his excitement into action, and pushing the door open. The wooden door made a familiar squeak, and when he returned to the quietness of the corridor, he took a step, knocked on the wooden floor and made a series of rapid rhythms, heading straight to Einstein's bookroom. In the room, the soft light of the kerosene light is like a thin golden yellow gauze, which is lightly draped on the mountainous books, creating a warm and peaceful state. Chindake stepped into the door, and the shadow stretched out under the light. He pulled out the knowledge card from his pocket and felt a slight flipping sound at his fingertips, like a leaf swaying in the wind. The edge of the card was buzzing lightly, and the sound seemed to be moving in the fingers. He held it high, read the content loudly, and spoke in a loud voice, and the words were hot and bloody. The words came out of his mouth, "Brother AI, look. The black hole is like this cozy bottle, it sucks everything in. I use modern knowledge to tell you that the secret of the universe is actually super simple." Einstein raised his head from the desk, his eyebrows slightly raised, and he couldn't hide the curious curve of the corner of his mouth. He stood up, and the chair scraped a rustling sound on the floor, like a light drum. When the two of them faced each other, the air in the bookroom suddenly came to life. Chindake turned around and grabbed a cute bottle from the corner of the kitchen. When the glass bottle collided with the tabletop, it made a crisp sound. He pointed the bottle mouth at Einstein and poured water into it. The gurgling sound of the water was accompanied by the hissing of bubbles, and the water splashed out, moistening the floor. "Your explanation is ridiculous and interesting," Einstein said, with a burst of surprise and interest in his voice. He looked at the fire in his eyes. "Can a black hole swallow a light like a bottle? This may stimulate my new thinking." Chindake's eyes lit up. He continued to plot happily, drawing an arc in the air with his hands. "Yes, brother AI. Imagine that we can predict time and space travel with this experience. Maybe I can help you change the corresponding discussion." His words stormed like a river, carrying an indepressible heat, and the lights in the house seemed to sway. The experiment is upgraded in laughter. Einstein picked up another bottle and tried to imitate the picture. The two of them came and went, and the sound of the bottles collided and formed a chaotic exchange. The water was pouring on the floor, and the damp breath spread out. Chindake slipped down his feet, and his body slid out a trace on the wooden floor. He laughed loudly, and the sound was rumbling in the room, like a sudden celebratory scripture. Einstein stretched out his hand and pulled him up. The action not only stabilized his body, but also narrowed the distance between them. The heat and noise in the room reached its climax. The night outside the window cast a mysterious shadow, and the window swayed lightly, rustling words. Einstein pointed out the window, his verb turned low. "It's so interesting, but don't forget Tesla's strange inventions. They are always unexpected. Maybe we need to be careful of the potential troubles." Chindake's knowledge was stuck in his palms in a faint flash. A low sway sounded like a hidden warning sign, reminding the random risks. He held the card a little uneasy, but he still maintained confidence. "Tesla? It sounds so exciting, but my knowledge card cannot be invalid when it is focused, otherwise we will be finished." His tail trembled slightly, his eyes turned out the window, and the silhouette was like a vague cloud. The smile gradually calmed down, and the two stood under the light, breathing gradually calmed down. Chindake put the Kale bottle back on the table, and the light touching of glass and would seem to be the ending sentence. Einstein looked out the window, his eyes deep, and there was still a watery breath in the air inside the room. The flashlight of the knowledge card is weak, accompanied by a faint warning sound, like a remote sound is murmuring, "Everything is calm." In the night, the mysterious silhouette continues to appear, waiting for the beginning of the next story. Chindake stuffed the knowledge into the jacket pocket, and the fabric rubbed it into a slight rustling sound, as if reminding him of the inner volatility. He took a deep breath and tried to suppress the remaining excitement, unable to completely cover up the light in his eyes. Einstein turned over, his eyes retracted from the deep night outside the window, and patted his shoulder lightly. The action was like an old friend's encouragement, warm and stable. "Come on, okay," Einstein said, his voice low and vibrating. "We should go to that venue. Sometimes changing the environment may make your thoughts clearer." The shadows in the corridor stretched out as they stomped, and the wooden floors made a crisp knocking sound, like a rapid rhythm. Chindake followed Einstein forward, and the edge of the jacket gently brushed across the wall, making a faint scratch sound. The air in the door was slightly damp, mixed with the vague echo of the sirens from the distance, which sounded like a hidden alarm, wandering in the night. The door crunched open, and the wind poured in, bringing the street's breath, the rumbling sound of the horse wheels crushing the stone road, gradually approaching. Einstein pointed out that the waiting horse was blurred under the light, and the driver's whip was swinging lightly, accompanied by the low horse's gale. They stepped onto the seat. The blurred light of the street lights was on the streets of Germany, and the horse was shaking forward. The noise of the car was like a low drum, covering Chindake's inner thoughts. He held the knowledge card in his pocket, and a faint movement came from his palm, as if the current was wandering at his fingertips. Einstein sat aside, his eyes set at the flashing lights outside the window, and his mouth slammed lightly. "Do you know, Daku," he said, his words were gentle, with a little reflection. "I often immerse myself in theory and forget to communicate with people. You always remind me that science should not be an isolated island." Chindaku turned to him, his eyes lit up for a moment, but he did not respond immediately, but just smiled, and the night wind outside the window blew into the car, bringing a clear chill. When they arrived at the gathering venue, the crisp tingling sound of the door was like a welcome overture. The Sand Dragon room was bright and warm, the tracery light of the slug jumped on the long table, the smoke of the smoke rising slowly, and a faint woody fragrance spread out. The deep conversations in the room were like the whispers of a beehive, and the crisp sound of the glasses colliding came in from time to time. Scientists were lying around the table and discussing enthusiastically. Chindake stood by the door, first hesitantly lowered his body and observed the surroundings. Einstein pushed his back lightly and signaled him to step forward. "Everyone, this is my friend, Chindake," Einstein introduced, his voice loud and gentle. "He brought some fresh sights." Chindake took a deep breath, his chest was undulating, and he straightened his waist and began to talk. "Brother AI, look," he said, with a passion for showing confidence in his speech, his hands swaying in the air, and the whistling voice came along. "The principle of this electric game is like a black hole, and things can't come out when they go in. But I promise that this is not a quarrel, I have the blessing of the system." The scientists around him made a shocking low voice, his eyes lit up, and Mrs. Jurong approached the crowd, and her face looked sharp and curious under the light. "Young man, your electrical knowledge is simply a revolution." She laughed out loud, and her voice was like a clear sound. "We can use it to change the world. I want to try it right away." The atmosphere in the room suddenly came alive, and the sound of the chaotic palm burst out like a sudden celebratory. The chair made a harsh noise on the floor, and Mrs. Jurong picked up a glass bottle, imitating Chindake's description, and the bottle hit the tabletop with a bang-bang sound. She smiled high, lifted the bottle up and poured it into water, and the hissing of bubbles came out with the splash of water. Chindake tried to explain the picture and found that the words were stuck in his throat. "Wait, Mrs. Jurong," he said, his voice panicked and his hands stiffened. "This is just what I learned from games. Don't be anxious." "Oh, my knowledge card seems to be damaged." His tail trembled slightly, and the knowledge card was flashing in his pocket, making a crackling sound. At that moment, the buzz in the room was playing like a honeycomb. Einstein smiled aside, knocked on the table lightly, and the rhythm was like a calm drum, trying to maintain order. His eyebrows were lightly raised, and a flickered in his eyes. "Dak, you always bring me a fresh perspective," he said, his verbal renditions to a low voice, with the preciousness of friends hidden in his verbal spirit. "But don't be too excited, science is not a game. But maybe I should be like you, open my heart." Chindake heard, his chest tightened, and he tried to breathe calmly, but he couldn't ignore the anxiety. In the corner of the room, the shadow of a mysterious figure moved quietly, and his breathing was almost soundless, like a hidden threat. "This kid knows too much," he murmured, his voice blending into the clock's ticking. "Nazi won't let him go." Scientists surrounded Chindake, and the applause of slapping the back was heard, and the cheerful cry came like a tide. He became the focus, feeling a sense of fatigue, and the sweat in his palm made the knowledge slide. Einstein pulled him aside, and the two of them met. At that moment, the voice from far away outside the window was like a murmur. "We have to be careful," Einstein said, with deep eyes. "There are always uncertainties in this world." Chindake pointed, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and the warning in his heart turned back. The noise of the gathering subsided, the rays of the storm danced on their figures, and the stars outside the night flashed, indicating that a larger storm was coming. The atmosphere in the room was calm, leaving behind a thread that was difficult to describe, like a hidden shadow, waiting for the next turn. Chindake leaned tiredly on the chair, his shoulders sank slightly, as if the smoke in the room was quietly covering his thoughts. Einstein patted his shoulder lightly, and the action was as gentle as a slight wind, trying to diffuse the remaining force. The low voices around him gradually calmed down, leaving only the voices outside the window, like invisible sentry guarding the night. He rubbed his head, took a deep breath to make his chest swell, and then stood up. The wooden floor squeaked lightly under the footsteps, and the echo lingered in the air. Einstein lighted up the experiment lights, and the buzzing sound of the light bubbles was like a silk current passing through the room, illuminating the simple experiment station in the corner. The two walked toward it, and the shadow grew under the light of the skull, like a hidden secret. Chindake picked up a random knowledge card, and the paper rubbed gently and made a slight rustling sound. He sniffed his eyes, read the words above, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Professor, listen to me." He opened his mouth, his verb tuning with a hot swaying, his fingers swaying in the air. "This theory of hot water freezes faster than cold water is super second, but it can allow us to overturn traditional concepts. I want to use it to prove that my knowledge is not nonsense, and I really want to leave traces in this era." Einstein's pen tip scratched the pen to make a sound, and the sound was as steady as a heartbeat. He raised his head, raised his eyebrows slightly, and there was a flash of curiosity and suspicion in his eyes. "Chindake," he responded quietly, his voice murmuring, "your strange thoughts have made me doubt my lifelong research. I pursue truth, and the new vision you bring may be key. I have to explore more to prove whether my theory is incomplete." They worked together to put out experiment props, and Einstein put a bottle of water and glassware on the table, and when the water was poured in, it made a crisp sound, like raindrops hitting the leaves. Chindake can use his fingers to simulate the shape of a black hole, and the action flow is almost filled with an urgent force. The gas lights in the room were ignited, the flames burst and rose, and the blue flames brought a wave of heat, accompanied by a slight burst sound. The clock ticked in the background, and each voice was like a lowly word of time, reminding the urgency of the atmosphere. Chindake suddenly stopped and his eyes lit up for a moment. "Hey, Professor AI Go," he joked, with a sarcastic lingering in his vocals, "is it so irritating to you? Imagine that you are known as AI Go in the scientific world, and we create history together. I want to prove that I am not a waste high school student." Einstein was stunned for a second, then a light smile came from his throat, the sound of a warm echo. "AI brother? Ha, this name is really interesting," he said, his lips slightly slight, not losing his wisdom. "Let me rethink my identity. My current goal is to draw a sense of spirit from your knowledge and create a new theory. Don't worry, we will face these mysterious phenomena." The glassware collided with jingles, adding to the tightness of the scene, like an unruly rhythm. Halfway through the experiment, they discovered a weird device in the drawer. The sound of a low click sound came out when the wheel was turning, and the sound was like the whisper of an old mechanical machine, which made the air more alarming. When Chindake touched it, the device vibrated slightly, accompanied by low current, like a hidden alarm. The two of them instantly became alert. Einstein's eyebrows were light, and a shadow flashed in his eyes. "Professor, that device looks very evil," Chindake said in a low voice, his fingers trembling slightly. It may have something to do with Nazi. As the voice fell, Chindak suddenly felt a sudden start, his body shook, and he sat back on the chair. The light of the worms in the room swayed, and the smoke seemed to deepen the illusion. He closed his eyes and the world instantly moved into another realm. In the dream, the electronic music of modern life is like a rhythm in the distance calling, and the buzzing sound effects of the electric sound intersects into a familiar picture, his room. The screen is flashed, full of noisy energy. Einstein's voice came from afar, gently calling out, pulling him back to reality. Chindak, wake up. The door crunched away from the door, and the sound was like a potential threat, wandering in the night. Chindak opened his eyes quietly, his chest was undulating, and he tried to breathe calmly. Einstein stood aside, his eyes deep, as if he had already understood the short departure. I dreamt of my modern life, Chindak breathed, his voice carrying a daze, making me want to go back even more, but now, I want to help you stop the crisis to prove my value. They finished their experiments, and Einstein carefully wrapped the device, and the friction sound of the paper rolled up lightly. The two of them pointed at each other, and at that moment, the relationship between teachers and disciples deepened like an invisible New York belt. The flames in the room gradually weakened, leaving only the sounds outside the window, indicating an unknown rumor. Chindak stood up from the chair and looked at Einstein, holding the briefcase tightly in his hand. Outside the night, a chill quietly penetrated, as if in a humble voice, waiting for the next turn to arrive. Chindak opened his room, and the night wind was like a cold hug, wrapped around the hustle and bustle of the street, allowing him and Einstein to enter the German scientific conference hall in the 1920s. The light casts a blurry shadow under the high arch, and the air is filled with the breath of old wood and a faint smell of smoke. He stood up straight, his shoulders slightly raised, and tried to press the unstable trembling in his heart, determined to prove his value in this wise gaze. The hall was filled with scientists, their low voices were like a dense rain spot, accompanied by the harsh sound of chairs scratching the floor. Einstein gently grabbed Chindak's arm and led him to the lecture. The action brought a stable force. The wooden lecture platform was filled with dim light under the light, and the buzzing sound of the old projector was like a hidden movement, pointing to the surrounding tights. Chindak took a deep breath, his chest was undulating, and his fingers couldn't help but hold the edge of the speech table, feeling the rough texture. He cleared his throat, danced his arms, and his words were filled with confidence. Dear masters, do you know? Hot water freezes faster than cold water. This is the secret weapon I bring to the future. His words roared in the air, accompanied by sparse coughs and rustling papers. The scientists in the audience had their eyebrows tightly, and some people turned forward, their eyes flashed with confusion, and the other was gently slamming, with a smile appearing on the corner of their mouths. A sudden sound of his palm burst out like an unexpected wave, thin and harsh, causing Chindak to snort on the corner of his mouth. He strode towards Tesla, knocking his fingers on the lecture stage, and the crisp knocking sound was swept in the room. Tesla stood aside, holding his inventive device in his hand, and the flashing arc-shaped coil machine made a low buzzing sound, like a living thing breathing. Chindak stepped forward, his eyes lit up for a moment, and he took out a cute bottle from his pocket. When the bottle opened, the bubbles hissed, like a small explosion. This is crazy, Tesla said, with confusion and admiration in his voice. Can I use a cold bottle and prove my circle? If this is true, I'm willing to try it. After all, science is just a risk. Chindak quickly started to move, and the bottle was connected to the device, and the current was out of control. The spark burst out, accompanied by the burst sound of sharp sauce and a pungent ozone smell. The hall was in chaos. Scientists ran away and scattered, and the sound of chairs hitting the floor was blowing one after another. An old man knocked over the seat, and the papers scattered in the air, like a shocked butterfly. Chindak stood there in a daze, his heart beat as fast as a drum, and he couldn't help but grin. The joking heat made him shout, "Look, this is innovation." On Taiwan, Einstein smiled and watched, his palms were soft and scattered, as if injecting order into this chaos. The sound of horse hoof knocking that came out of the window was strong, like the sound of drums in the distance. Einstein took out the notebook from his pocket, and the tip of the pen scraped a slight rustling sound on the paper. He said in a low voice, "May, although your theory is absurd, it ignited my spirit. Perhaps, this is the other side of the relative argument. I want to try to incorporate it into my research." His eyes were deep and his eyebrows were slightly raised. At that moment, the spark of spirit flashed in the brain, hidden under the calm appearance without any trace. The chaos gradually subsided, leaving only the projector's continuous buzzing sound and the ticking of the far-off clock, as if time was quietly urging. Chindake suddenly became alert, and a confusing sound of clothes rubbing from behind the curtain. He stopped and turned around. There was a bit of cold chill in the air, and a suspicious figure hid in the shadow, his eyes as sharp as a ray of light. The man said to himself in a low voice, almost unreal, "The words of this time traveler are too dangerous. The secret of the time and space capsule cannot fall into the hands of outsiders. I have to report it." Chindake's shoulders froze slightly, and his fingers touched his pocket unconsciously, and the scene was calm, leaving only the potential threat lingering in the air. He took a deep breath and took out the knowledge card from his pocket. When the card flipped, it made a slight tearing sound, as powerless as an empty echo. The content has expired and there are only blurred ink left on the card. Chindake's eyebrows froze, and the smile on the corner of his mouth froze. The whispers of scientists in the audience gradually turned into a wave of ridicule, and his palms weakened, turning into sporadic echoes. He held the card tightly, his fingers trembled slightly, and he smiled strongly. "Hey, AI, is this card invalid? It's okay, I have my mouth. Let's continue to flip this scene." Einstein stepped forward, touching Chindake's shoulders lightly, and the action was like a warm support. He said, "Don't be angry, your passion is exactly what we need. Facing these challenges together, our friendship will become a force to change history." His voice was low and calm, with a flash of inspiration in his eyes, two people standing shoulder to shoulder, with the background of the lights and the voices outside the window. At that moment, the friends' new belt deepened like an invisible wire. Chindake's breathing slowly and down. He was a little bit, and the confusion in his chest was gradually replaced by determination. They left the lecture table and walked on the floor and made a quick knock. Chindake still held the invalid knowledge card in his hand, and the edge of the paper was slightly rolled up, like an abandoned secret. The suspicious figure followed quietly behind, the shadows stretched in the dim corridor, and the cold wind outside the window was whispering, indicating that the Nazi chant was approaching. The two figures disappeared outside the door, and in the dark, a piece of indeterminate sneaked in quietly, waiting for the next turn to arrive. Chindake and Einstein stepped out of the door of the scientific conference hall, and the night was like a thick curtain covering the streets of Berlin. The cold wind blew over, carrying the moist rain and the horses' hooves of the far-round horses, as if urging them to speed up their pace. Chindake was still holding the invalid knowledge card tightly in his hand, and the edge of the paper was slightly curled like a forgotten password. He glanced at Einstein. The physics master's shoulders were straight, his eyes swept over the shadows around him, and his breathing became heavier, as if every breath was filled with potential warning. They walked along the dim stone road, and the yellow light of the street lights pulled a long reflection on the wet ground. Suddenly, a heavy sound came from the corner of the street, and a group of figures appeared. They were wearing fur coats, holding flashing guns in their hands, and leather boots stepped on the watery road, causing splashes to fly. Chindake's video was locked in them staring at Einstein's briefcase, which contained the secret of the time and space capsule. His heart suddenly jumped, grabbed Einstein's arm and shouted, "Run!" The rushing sirens roared from a distance, accompanied by the sound of the gun loading, like an ominous drum. The two men rushed towards a narrow alley, slid on the stone, scraping out a harsh sound. The Nazi members shouted in the alley, "Stop!" Chindake slid over a parked car, and the car drove around, and the horse burst into a low hissing like a shock. Einstein fell to the ground, and his briefcase slid from his hands, revealing the metal slimming space capsule inside. At that moment, the air seemed to freeze, and a low vibrating sound came out from the inside of the device, like a hidden movement. Chindake quickly leaned over and lifted his briefcase. His fingertips in the cold metal were flashing past his earlier knowledge in the sea of brain. He murmured, "The principle of hot water icing faster than cold water." The words were like a hidden force: activate the wave of the knowledge card. His voice was full of convincingness, which made the pursuers suspicious for a while. Their steps stopped in the alleyway and their breathing became heavy. Einstein got up, patted off the dust on his sleeve, and the two of them flipped over a railing together. The sound of the metal hitting the mirror swayed the night sky, and the ball teared the air and broke through the quiet surroundings, making Chindake's shoulders stiff. They entered a deserted warehouse, and the door slammed, blocking the outside roar. In the warehouse, a dark and damp smell came over the surface, mixed with the musty smell of Chinyan wood. Chindake gasped on the wall, and his fingertips knocked on the surface of the space capsule, and the crisp knocking sound was swept in the small space. "Brother AI, we can't let these guys take away the time and space capsule," he said, his breathless passion. "Remember my cold knowledge card? If I convince them, it will be on the stage. I will use my secondary knowledge to hold everything." Einstein's eyes were fixed. He straightened his body and his shoulders slightly forward. "Maybe your absurd theory actually saved us," he responded, his voice low and smiling. "This time we are not just fighting alone. We are partners. When facing this crisis together, I will not let the Nazis destroy our discoveries." The two of them met with their eyes, and the tacit understanding at that moment was like an invisible thread, which tightened them together. Outside, the sound of the engine starting is approaching, like a slump in the wilderness. They moved quickly, using surrounding wooden boxes and ropes to set up traps. The wooden boxes were piled up and there was a squeaking protest when the rope was pulled. A Nazi member rushed in and was knocked to the ground, and the sound of the curse exploded in the warehouse. Chindake took advantage of the opportunity to escape, and Einstein held the exit with his body, and his fist hit the wooden door to emphasize his determination. "Take that thing over, scientist," Nazi leader shouted, his threatening words as sharp as a blade. "Do you fools think you can escape Nazis' clutches? This is for a greater historical progress." Chindake stopped and turned to face them. His breathing was gentle and his confident smile appeared. "Wait," he shouted, his voice rumbling in the warehouse, "do you know? Hot water freezes faster than cold water. This is science. If you stop and listen, I can prove that the space capsule is not what you think. It requires correct knowledge to start." His words were like rippling ripples, which temporarily calmed the pursuit's movements. Their eyes flashed through a silky look, and the dim yellow light of the street light penetrated from the door, illuminating the tight confrontation. Taking advantage of this empty file, the two of them rushed out of the exit on the other side. Einstein's briefcase was held tightly in his hand, and the hidden movements inside the space capsule became their background chapter. They slid into a shadow of a remote alley, and blew over the cold wind, giving them a chance to breathe. Chindake leaned on the wall, his chest was undulating, and his sweat slid down his head. Einstein touched the surface of the capsule lightly, and the faint flash was like a long and secret flame. His expression was thoughtful and his eyebrows were slightly snaked, as if he was ruling the possibility of the future. In the night, the street lights are uncertain, indicating that another battle is about to open. The two stood there calmly, and the friendly New York belt was even more in chaos, and an uncertain light flashed in their eyes. Chindake and Einstein curled up in the shadows of the Berlin alley. The cold wind whipped the corners of their clothes like a whip. The low and deep birds of the engine were approaching from a distance, like a porous beast ready to emerge. Chindake wiped off the sweat from the magnitude, his fingers trembled slightly, and he refused to release the cold space capsule. His eyes swept over the darkness around him, and the street lights cast scattered light spots on the wet stone road, reminding the danger that it was nowhere to be there. Einstein touched the surface of the capsule lightly, his eyebrows were tightly locked, as if listening to the movement hidden in it. They squatted down and hid behind a raw trash can. The sound of the Nazi soldiers' leather boots came from the entrance of the alley. The heavy stomp shattered the gravel on the ground, bursting out a crisp echo. Chindake took a deep breath, grabbed Einstein's sleeve, and whispered, "Come on, brother AI, we have to find a place to catch our breath." They quickly snatched into a nearby abandoned warehouse, and the door closed. The noise of the outside and the creaking sound. In the warehouse, the air was filled with dust and the smell of Chen Yan's wooden heads. The dim light penetrated through the high windows, illuminating the dust on the ground. Chen Dake knelt down and drew a straw picture on the soil with his fingers, with his lines twistingly filled with determination. The engine sluts kept whispering in the background, like a urging drum, and he explained along his painting, "We can't just escape. With my modern intellectual design traps, we can make those Nazis eat." His voice carried a stream of hot blood that was unique to the boy, and his eyes lit up in the shadows. Einstein squatted aside and pointed to the same. His fingers rubbed the old ropes and rags, and these things were scattered in the corners, like forgotten props. "Maybe your thoughts are ridiculous, but they make sense," he said, with a smile in his verbal tuning, and his shoulders slightly forward. "This trap may delay them and give me time to recite new theories. My goal is to protect the time and space capsule and find the spirit of Otaku's relationship from it. Let's act together." Chindate grinned, grabbed a cute bottle in his hand, and searched out from the dark corner of the warehouse. He poured water and the bottle made a slight sound, as if it was a sudden objection. The cloth rubbed rustling, and he wrapped the bottle with rags and quickly formed it into a simple device. "Okay. Remember, knowledge is power," he said. He was zipping and moving like a veteran craftsman. "I convince you with the buff of this knowledge card. The system may have something to do with the capsule. This is our key to the modern era. I won't let it fall into the hands of a bad person." They quietly dived out of the warehouse and advanced along the alleyway. Chindake took ahead and walked lightly, avoiding the patrol soldiers' visual lines every step. The fallen leaves on the road were trampled, causing fine and crisp cracks, and the whistling sound of flags in the wind was accompanied by the whistle and hum. Einstein followed behind, discussing physics in a low voice. His words resembled a shaped line that transformed the tightness into a strategy. "Accurately, this system has allowed me to re-examine the possibility of a relative discussion," he said, his voice calmly carrying excitement. "My goal is to transform science into actual strength. Thank you, you let me see courage beyond theory." They came to a crossroads, and the flashing lights of the street lights stretched their shadows. Chindake hit a cold bottle in the water on the road, and when the bottle hits the stone, it gives off a light tingling. He straightened up and glanced at Einstein. The two of them had a look of eyes. The tacit understanding at that moment was like an invisible spark. Far away, the siren's sharp sound tore apart the night sky, increasing the urgency around them. Soon, Nazi soldiers appeared, and 3 figures pushed in with guns along the way. Their boots stomped in a whole stomp sound on the stone road, like an ominous march. Chindake pulled Einstein and hid in the corner, waiting with his breath. When the soldier approached the water, he ignited the trap, and a bang of explosion exploded. The flames hissed, and the soldiers slipped to the ground, turning into a group of wolves. Chindake couldn't help laughing, and the laughter was rumbling in the alleyway, like a mockery of the chaotic. The action was successful, and they took the trouble to retrieve the relevant traces of the space capsule. Back at the warehouse, Chindake checked the system, and the knowledge card in his hand suddenly shone with light, accompanied by a buzzing low bird, like a heartbeat. Einstein flipped some papers beside him, and the rustling sound highlighted his inner change. His expression changed from deep thought to firmness, and his shoulders were slightly straight. "We did it." Chindake said that the sound was full of vigorous glory. The sound of the engine outside gradually faded away, and the cold wind was still wailing, but the air inside the warehouse seemed to be getting lighter. Chindake held the knowledge card and the time and space capsule that shone light, and had a conversation with Einstein. The two of them faced the warehouse door, and in the night, an uncertain light reflected in their eyes, indicating the arrival of the next challenge. Chindake held the radiant knowledge card tightly, and the air in the warehouse seemed to condense for a moment. The sound of the engine outside has gradually faded away, leaving only the cold wind in from the door, bringing a biting heart. He and Einstein were looking at each other, and their eyes reflected the blurred silhouette of the future, and they also flashed their determination to explode. He stood up, the knowledge card in his hand trembled slightly, and a low buzzing sound came out, like a swarm of bees gathering quietly from afar. The dust of the warehouse floats in the dim light, accompanied by the rhythm of the water pipe ticking, creating a tight overture. Chindake took a deep breath, his shoulders were slightly straightened, and the young man's hot blood was ripped in his chest. He glanced at Einstein and saw the other party flipping the paper in his hand in a hurry, the rustling sound of the paper rubbing back in the air. Einstein's eyebrows were tightly locked and stretched out in the moment of turning. He grabbed the space capsule, and the surface of the capsule flashed blue light, and a low vein came like a heartbeat. The two of them pointed at the heads, and the tacit understanding was like an invisible Newport, connecting them tightly. Suddenly, the warehouse gate was pushed open by a huge force, and the metal hitting the mirror exploded, and the Nazi soldiers rushed in like a flood. Their boots stepped on the concrete floor and produced heavy geckos. Each step shocked the air around them, causing dust to fall from the beams. Chindake quickly rolled to the back of the wooden box, with a rough wooden head tightly attached to his back, and the knowledge card in his hand flashed. He shouted, "Brother AI, we can't let these Nazis snatch the time and space capsule." The sound was rumbling in the warehouse, carrying an unquestionable sense of determination. His fingers touched the card lightly, and a beam of light shot out, accompanied by the sharp sound. The soldiers instantly distracted. Their guns were loaded, and the sound of the clicks rose like a warning clock. Chindake took the opportunity to sweep towards Einstein, stepping on the ground to make slight scratches. The soldiers shouted and rushed forward, and the chaotic footsteps formed a noise. Einstein's high-end space capsule was placed in front of Chindake with his body. His figure was drawn in the blue light, and his verbal tutoring was filled with a sense of excitement. "Chindake, your ridiculous genius thought awakened my inner doubts. I originally pursued pure theory, but now I understand that science needs to be integrated into life. This otaku-like discussion will change everything." His words were like a wind, blowing away the tightness around him. The Nazi leader stood up, with a shadow on his face. His voice was low and threatening. "You stupid scientists, the time and space capsules belong to us. Hand over them, otherwise you will pay for the price." His words whipped into the air like a whip, and the gun in his hand reflected a faint light, projecting a cold wheel. Chindake jumped up without waiting for the soldiers to react and used the knowledge card to create a virtual projection. The projector-like humming sounded, and the absurd science fiction images flashed in the warehouse, leaving the soldiers stunned. The light starts to flash, casting a layer of shadows, enhancing the confusion of vision. Chindake wrestled with a soldier, and his fist hit the other party's body, and each shot was accompanied by a collision of breath and bones. He shouted, "Wait, brother AI, look at the tip of this knowledge card, which says hot water freezes faster than cold water. Isn't this the key to our fight? Let us defeat them with this ridiculous truth, and I want to prove that I am not a failed senior high school student, but a hero who can change history." Einstein seized the opportunity and activated the time and space capsule. The capsule burst out with strong flashes, and the burst sound exploded like thunder. The soldiers were shrunk and the dust and debris in the warehouse flew like rain. Chindake felt a vibration passing through his arm, and the energy made his heart beat faster. They were back to back, gasping for the moment of orgasm. The conflict stopped, the soldiers retreated, and the cold voice of the outside of the warehouse became far away. Chindake helped Einstein up and patted him on the shoulder. The action was simple and full of tacit understanding. Einstein looked at the capsule, and the spirit in his brain was like a tide. He quickly grabbed the paper, and the scratching sound stood out in the quiet. "Yes, Chindake, your words let me see a new vision. Let's protect this capsule together, not only for the present but also for the future. I finally found the spirit of theory." His voice was soft, with joy of liberation. They recalled the origin of the card, and the card made a familiar tingling sound, rumbling in the warehouse. Chindake said, "This is not just for science, but for me to grow from the second dream of the second year and become a man who can truly protect my friends. I want to use this knowledge card to prove my value." Einstein pointed his head, his eyes flashed warmly. "Friendship has gone through all theories." The lens was slid and stretched far away. They stood in the middle of the warehouse, holding the space capsules in their hands, smiling at each other. The light of the capsule weakens, projecting a blurry future image, and an uncertain light flashes in the night. The cold wind blew over it lightly, leaving behind endless imagination. Chindake and Einstein stood in the middle of the warehouse, and the light of the space capsule in their hands was weak, like a piece of cloth slamming in the dark space. The cold wind on the outside comes from the door, bringing a pungent gray smell of the air, as if reminding them that this temporary refuge is not forever. He took a deep breath, his chest undulating, and his breath was like a key, trying to open the shackle in his heart. The wooden boards of the warehouse creaked in the wind, as if echoing his hesitation. Chindake slowly lifted the space-time capsule, his eyes closed on the flickering surface, and his heart turned back to the modern movement. The past has come like a tide, from a physically failed otaku to now holding a tool to change history. This journey allows him to arrive, and the hero is not just in books. Einstein's leather shoes were stomping on the concrete floor, making a stern sound. He approached Chindake, and the two of them faced each other, with their shoulders almost touching each other. The capsule trembled slightly, and the low buzzing sound came like a heartbeat, shaking the air around it. Einstein's eyes were warm and calm, and there was an unsolved secret in his eyes. From his pocket, Chindake took out the knowledge card system, and the card flipped between his fingers, and the rustling friction sounded lightly, telling the hidden truth like a detailed word. He sent the card to Einstein, and the lights of the warehouse flashed at that moment, projecting blurred scientific symbols on the card and dancing in the dust. "Brother AI, this knowledge card is not a casual thing," Chindake said. "It is like a universe password, connecting my ridiculous points, so that we can get here." Einstein laughed. The sound was rumbling in the empty warehouse, as if it had broken the remaining tightness. A smile climbed up to the corner of his mouth, and he patted Chindake on the shoulder, carrying a sudden slight speed in his movements. "Dake, your secondary nonsense," he said, "makes me think about the relative argument again, and even inspires the otaku contrast. Remember, our friendship transcends time and space. Maybe next time, I will go to your mobile world to connect." They recalled those ridiculous experiences together. The moment Shindo was talking about the black hole with a cold bottle, the bottle's swaying gurgle sound reappeared in the memory, accompanied by Einstein's surprised breath. The shadow of the warehouse stretched out under the light, like a drama about to end. Chindake decided. He patted Einstein on the shoulder and the two of them picked them up. The rustling sound of the fabric rubbing gently, and the birds coming from afar outside the warehouse screamed, and the sound was like a free sign, brushing away the remaining chill. "Brother AI, I was just an otaku who failed physics," Chindake said, his voice carrying a slight shock. "I'm a hero who changed history because of this mouth and knowledge card. But I have to go back to the present. Who knows which era I will enter next time?" After the hug was over, they turned to the space capsule. Einstein's eyes flashed with a flash of dissatisfaction, and he helped Chindake put the capsule into the hidden box. The clicking sound on the box closure rose sharply, and then a short and slight crackling of current, marking the energy gradually calmed down. The light of the capsule was extinguished like fire, leaving only a faint residual point in the gap between the box. "The space capsule will be left for you to keep at this time," Chindake said, with jokes and stern words in his speech. "Don't let those Nazis come again. I don't want to have another funny time in space battle." He said goodbye to Einstein, and the sound of the warehouse was lightly stinging, and the sound was like a light saying goodbye. As he turned around, the airflow around the door produced a deep voice, as if he was calling out to another world. Einstein stood there, watching him. "The secret of the knowledge card may be a joke of the universe," he said. The soft voice was full of power, but it allowed me to see more possibilities. "Goodbye, my friend, our story begins." His smile was lit up in the dark, and at that moment, the air in the warehouse seemed to be swelling. Chindake walked towards time and space, and every step was determined, and he walked back on the concrete floor. The door opens slowly, and the air flows up, bringing a pungent smell of dust. He turned his last glance, and Einstein's smile was fixed there like a light tower. Then, the door closes, and the picture fades out in the blurred time and space cracks. the cracks are like an uncertain light, suggesting more adventures of time travel in the future. The voice gradually moved away in my ears, leaving only endless imagination, quietly extending in the night.